All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending Take 2 of introducing the Google Drive SDK. Thanks for being here. I'm John Day-Richter. I'm the tech lead for the Google Drive SDK, and this is my very good friend.
I'm Josh Hudgins. I'm the product manager.
All right, well, thanks for coming out. We're going to tell you all about the Google Drive SDK. Take us through what we're going to talk about.
So here's what we're going to do today. First off, I just want to point out that we do have free t-shirts in the back. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you know how we're going to roll in this session today. Free t-shirt. So the way we'll do it is we'll have a little Q&A at the end, and if you ask a really awesome question, you're going to have a t-shirt coming your way. So look forward to that. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Drive, what it is as a product, and why we felt like an SDK is such a critical part of Drive as a product, and how you might use it, why we built it, that sort of thing. Then we're going to talk through what we launched in V1 of the SDK when we launched Drive back in late April. Then we're going to get to the exciting stuff, the stuff that we have just launched over the last couple days, and then some things that will be coming down the pipe soon, some stuff we're very excited about. So first, a little bit about Drive and the SDK and why we think the SDK is an important part of the product. So Drive itself, when I think about Drive, I like to describe it along three main features or three main pillars. You saw a little bit of this in Clay's demo in the keynote, but we'll kind of go through this. And as we go through these things, you'll see why overlaying an SDK over the top of these things can be such a powerful thing. But the first pillar is this idea of access anywhere, and I think you saw that demonstrated very well today. This is that no matter where you are, we have given you access to the content you have put in Drive. So we do this through a number of ways. The first is through the web UI at drive.google.com. Everything in your Drive is available to you through any web browser that we support, and you can do everything you need to do there through the web. You can share, you can manage your files, you can collaborate on them with Google Docs, you can do a whole number of things through the web UI. There's also the sync clients. We have sync clients now for Mac and Windows, and the sync client is a really terrific piece of software that you install on your desktop machine, and it's going to sync content on your desktop machine back and forth to the cloud. So changes you make locally will be reflected back in the cloud, and changes you make in the cloud are broadcast back down to your local machine. So wherever you have these sync clients installed, all of your content will always be up to date across all of your different machines. And we also have mobile devices. Native apps on mobile devices. We just announced the iOS app is available today on iPads, iPods, pretty much any iOS device. We have mobile devices on Android, and now we also have Drive integration built directly into Chrome OS. So virtually any device you're working on, you're going to be able to access your content there and interact with it in meaningful ways. The next thing is Drive is really all about collaboration. It's not just about storing things. It's about giving you ways to work with other people on the content in Drive. So there's three main ways we allow you to do this. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about some really exciting things coming in this space. But the first one of these things is sharing. In Drive, we let you share content with people for a variety of different ways. You can make content public. You can share content with large groups of people through an unlisted link. You can share directly with other Drive users, just adding them directly to the content, and then only you and they can see it, or you can even share with groups. And when you do that sharing, it's not just a blanket share. You can decide what kind of things that person can do with the thing you're sharing. So I can say, for instance, if I shared something with John, I probably don't want to let him edit my file. He's not really that reliable, so I would just give him view access. Whereas other people, you could give edit access or even access to the add comments. And comments is the very next thing I want to talk about here. We now have given people that use Drive the ability to add comments to anything in their Drive. In the past, you could do that for Google Docs, but arbitrary files you couldn't. Now you can add add comments to any file at all in Drive. And so you can work together in your team and add comments to things and collaborate on those things all at once. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of collaboration is, you saw this today in the demo as well, is Google Docs, of course. Google Docs allows you to collaborate on a level that's virtually unique across this space. You can co-edit documents in real time, and everyone's changes are automatically broadcast to everyone else. If I'm working with John on a document, I can see immediately the changes he's making to the document, so it's an incredibly powerful tool for collaboration. And then the last thing is search. And I think this also came across very well in the demo today as well. If you talk about this for images, it's a really cool thing. Every image that is uploaded into Drive, we run through the Google Goggles backend, which is the same technology that powers Google's visual search. So this backend can recognize a number of different things in your images. It can recognize famous landmarks, faces, corporate logos, and it does a terrific job at doing optical character recognition on the content in the images. So if you upload pictures of mountains or famous landmarks or buildings and you can search for those things, the demo we like to do is Mount Everest. We just uploaded a ton of different pictures from users of Mount Everest. no metadata at all associated with the image. No file names, no EXIF, no geotagging, nothing. And Google Goggles can identify them as pictures of Everest. It's really quite amazing to see. So all that power of search right there in Drive for you to do. And then what we do then, go ahead and click it, is over the top of all these different services, we have overlaid an SDK, which we're going to give developers the ability to access all this technology, and John's going to talk more about that.
So the Drive SDK really cuts across all of these three different sort of pillars of Google Drive and makes them available to the applications that you want to write. And before we kind of go into what the Drive SDK does, we felt like we needed to explain why we built an SDK at all, because we know we are not the only game in town, and other people have SDKs too, but we felt like there were some things about our product that were so special that it was important for us to make an SDK so that other people could start writing apps on top of it. So first of all, with Google Drive, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a place to keep stuff. We wanted to make it a place to do stuff. So no matter which of the Google Drive clients you're using, you can use your file on that system. So if you're using the Google Drive web client, you can do a whole lot more than just download the files that are in Google Drive. Using Drive apps, which you heard a little bit about at the keynote, and Josh is going to show us an awesome demo of in a second, you can take your apps on the web and just edit them with other web apps that you've installed. And if there's something that you want to do on the web that Google hasn't written a product to handle, doesn't matter, because chances are somebody else did, and you can use the file there. Also on our Android client, you can of course open your files using any app that you've got installed on Android that can handle those files. But if you want to use a web app that you've installed on the web, our Android client can open your file in that web app on your mobile device. And with the improvements that we've made to our mobile API, if you don't want to have to go through the hassle of downloading your file and handing it off to another app, apps can be written that can access Google Drive's data store directly. So there's a lot of ways to continue to use your files, even when they're stored on Google Drive. And you can reach millions of users. Google Drive has a lot of users. I can't talk specific numbers. It's more than 2. There's a lot of guys out there. And then you're not just getting access to Google Drive's users, you're getting access to the entire Google ecosystem of users via things like OAuth login and like all these different mechanisms that will bring Google users to your app if you build it on top of Google Drive. And we're really committed to helping our developers succeed. And there's a lot of ways that we really think that developers can do well using this API. So for example, like almost everything at Google I/O, when you use the Google Drive APIs, you get access to the entire world of Google APIs. So it's really easy to integrate, calendar and contacts and like all the different stuff that we've already got APIs for. It's really easy to build that into your app that's already talking to Google Drive. And Google Drive is all integrated with Google Docs. So lots of features that are features of Google Docs become ways of publicizing your app. When you share a document that was created with your app, the user gets shared your app too, or at least an opportunity to install the app. So your app can grow virally just through users sharing content and collaborating. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that there was really every mechanism to publicize the work you've done. So we've integrated with the Chrome Web Store, and there's this entire store where users can discover new Google Drive apps and find out more about what you're working on. Did I forget anything there, Josh?
I think you
covered
pretty
thanks.
much everything in the prezo.
So here's what we've launched already, what we launched before Google I/O started, and we wanted to just do a brief overview. So first, there's the Google Drive API. So we've completely rebuilt this from the old Google Docs List API, which is sort of similar, but we've built it as a RESTful API. Credentials and authentication are now based on OAuth 2, far more modern. And we've got client libraries and code samples in 6 different languages, so there are really a lot of options to build your app however you want to.
So as part of the SDK v1, we also introduced this concept of a Drive app. So as we were building out Drive, we had built a viewer that could give you read-only views of between 30 and 40 different file types, many of the major things people like to view, like PDFs and Word documents and images and things like that. But we realized there was still this entire constellation of content that we just didn't provide much of an experience for. So what we wanted to do was open up our UI to third-party developers so they could take an app that they had already built that maybe provided a nice experience for a certain type of content and integrate that app directly into the Drive UI. And so that's what Drive apps are all about. So you can build an app and then you basically tell us what sorts of MIME types or file extensions you can handle. And once the user installs that app, we interweave that app into the very fabric of the UI. So everywhere you interact with a piece of content of that type, users have the choice of using the app of yours that they installed. We also offer you a neat option if you've already built a web app that stores content in its own backend or some sort of proprietary system, but you still want to integrate with Drive. You don't necessarily have to store the content in Drive. You can continue to store the content in your own system and then provide a pointer to it in Drive so users will see it in their Drive as if it were any other type of item. They can do things with it like sharing or manage it within the Drive UI. So it's pretty much like any other item, but when you click on it, it opens the content up from your system. So you have a lot of different integration options depending on where you're at as a web app.
And if you write an app that handles a type that already is handled by Google Drive, we're fine with that. If you wrote a better viewer, the user can choose to make that the default, and they'll use yours from now on.
But the best thing about it is we give users control over the experience. So if you provide a great experience, we don't favor our own in any way, so they can build a custom experience that makes sense for them. And another thing that we've done, I think, that makes the development experience very fulfilling here in Drive is we've done a lot of great integrations with the Chrome Web Store. So if you've built an app that does integrate with Drive, you can list it and distribute it through the Chrome Web Store, and there's a lot of great things that come along with that. It's a great mechanism for discovery, so users can come in through the Chrome Web Store's front page and then find the Drive apps collection, and if you had integrated with Drive, your app would show up there. But not just promotion and servicing and discovery through the Chrome Web Store, but we also link to the Chrome Web Store all throughout the Drive UI. We take tons of opportunities to promote apps in different scenarios where it makes sense that will link off to the Chrome Web Store so users can make more avenues to find and discover and install your app. So as part of the Chrome Web Store, you also get a lot of other things for free. You get things like bug reports, ratings, reviews, and analytics, and all these things. Great feedback from your user community all come for free as part of being listed in the store. And then maybe the best thing about it now is it doesn't just work for Chrome. Despite the fact it's called the Chrome Web Store, you can now install Drive apps from the Chrome Web Store in any browser.
So the Drive SDK also has some great security features. And we found that users are more likely to use apps that they trust. So if you have a very scary security warning when your app is installed, users often walk away at that point. We've done everything we can to make sure that your app gets at the data that it needs, but only the data that it needs, so that users aren't scared off, and there's less of danger of a user installing an app that misbehaves. So many people have asked, can I do this thing with the Google Drive SDK version 1? And I will say, no, you can't do that. And they will say, are you lazy? And I will say, yes, but that's not it. It's actually a feature. So with Drive apps in the SDK version 1, apps can only access files that the app created or that the user explicitly gave access to. So if a user's installed your app, your app still can't get at their files until they choose to open the file with your app in Google Drive. And that way, if a user installs an evil app, it's still only being evil at 1 or 2 files. And it's very easy in the Google Drive UI to uninstall apps and revoke access to files for a particular app if a user feels like it's misbehaving. And all of this is bringing great peace of mind to our suspicious web users. And finally, there's a file picker here, because we know that a lot of apps need the ability to have a user pick a file from their corpus, and we don't give you any way to do that through the API. So with this JavaScript component, you can pop up a view of the user's drive, served from Google, so it's in a trusted context from Google. They choose the files that they want to open with your app. The picker grants access to your app when the user chooses it, and then your app has access to the files. So you can still make apps that operate on any arbitrary file in the user's corpus, and it's very secure. So it's demo time.
Okay.
Let's show how all of this works.
So what I want to do is walk you through a scenario where John here is my boss.
I'm the boss?
Yep.
All right.
And he has just come up with a revolutionary new idea for a software product.
Hudgins! I got me an idea for a software project.
And so he is a dedicated Microsoft project user, and he has shared with me a Microsoft project file. So what I need to do is figure out what he wants me to do and then do it, but the catch is that I don't have access to any of my local desktop applications that I would normally do. I have to figure out how to do all this stuff, all from the cloud, all in a web browser.
Hudgins, did I just see you uninstall the app so you can demo installing the app?
You may have seen that very thing.
Okay.
So here's the MPP file that he shared with me. Now, if I click on this in Drive, Drive doesn't actually preview this file. It's one of the file types that Drive doesn't do anything with, so I have no preview. So without Drive apps, I would be stuck right here. But fortunately, we give you this little icon down here that says I can get more apps. And what this is going to do is open the Chrome Web Store and show me all the apps that are integrated with Drive that can do something with Microsoft Project. So fortunately, we have 3 different choices here I can choose from. And I'm going to install Ganter. It's going to take me here, and I'm going to hit Add to Chrome. And that's going to install it into Drive. And if I go back here and hit Refresh, you can see that my project plan now has the Ganter icon next to it, which means when I click on this, it's going to open it in Ganter. So I'm going to do that, and it's going to ask for permission to access my Drive. So this is our auth screen. You can see all the different things it wants to access. I'm going to hit Allow Access, and it's going to open the file.
Hudgins, where are we with that project plan?
Getting close. So it's pulling the binary over from Drive. Now it's going to open it and render it. And using John's typical project code words, I can see first task here. I know exactly what that is. He needs me to create a wireframe mock-up of his great new software idea.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have buttons. The kids love buttons nowadays.
So I need to create this new product that has more buttons than we typically have. So fortunately, I have an app installed into Drive that can do something like that. I have an app called Balsamic, which allows me to create mocks and wireframes and that sort of thing. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to start designing this new product that he wants to see. And it's clear we're going to need a lot of buttons based on the feedback I've gotten so far.
Make a button so you can +1 another button.
So that's probably a good amount of buttons there. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to call that the new button design. The cool thing about this is when I save it, it doesn't save a local copy of that file down to my machine. It saves it directly back to my Drive. So I can go back to my Drive and see it right here as new button design. So now I'm going to share that back with John, because he needs to see it and make sure that the buttons are numerous enough and properly positioned.
Oh, they better be numerous.
Yeah. So I'm going to share that. And I believe John's email address is demo2. Hit share. And so now when I switch over to John's account, that will show up here, new button design. So when I click on that, he doesn't have Balsamic installed.
What is this?
But it tells him that it knows that Balsamic created this file. So when he tries to preview the file, it says, hey, you're going to need Balsamic to look at this. And there's a button right here to install it. So he can install this. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. But this is just a great growth channel for web app install bases, because as people across these teams start to share content they create with these apps around, there are constant upsells all through the UI to help users find and discover apps they can use to work together on these things. So what John would do then is install that app, and he would be able to look at it and approve it and all those different things. So let's pretend he's done that.
Oh, that's a good design.
Buttons looking good?
Yeah, buttons all right.
So now we need to get legal approval for this thing. And our legal department has some sort of unusual requirements.
They need to get the documents via fax, because that's what those people understand.
So apparently our legal department has no computers whatsoever, and they only receive documents via fax. And from long experience working with these guys, I've also learned that if I draw a smiley face on the paper before I fax it, they'll tend to approve it. The problem is I don't have a printer and I don't have a fax machine. But fortunately, I do have an app that allows me to edit images. But before we do that, we need to save our mock-up back to Drive as an image. So I can open the mock-up back up.
Hudgins, is that contrived example done yet?
We're getting closer. And I'm going to export that to PNG. And we see the new button design show up right here in Drive. I'm going to click on it and make sure everything's looking good. There's the PNG, looks good, viewing it in the Google Drive viewer. So now I need to edit that because it's going to have a smiley face on it. So I'm going to open that with an image editor that I've installed called Pixlr. And that will open up the image, and if you've used a lot of image editing tools, this is a fairly familiar interface, and I'm just going to draw a smiley face right here. Close enough.
Like money in the bank.
Yeah. So now I'm going to save that, and it's going to save it back over the original file back in my drive. So that's saved, and let's go back and make sure that yep, everything's looking good. So now all I need to do is fax this to legal. I don't have a fax machine, but what I do have is an app called HelloFax that will allow me to fax almost anything in my drive to a fax number. So now I'm going to open this PNG with HelloFax. And what that's going to do is start loading the document in the background. It's going to ask me what I want to do with it. Well, I want to fax it. So I'm going to click that. It's loading the document, and while it's doing that, I'm going to type a made-up fax number. And you can see that the document has been loaded here. It's got my smiley face, it's got our design, and all I have to do is hit send it now, and it will fax that document directly to our legal department. So we managed to do all of that without touching any local software or any hardware, doing it all through the cloud. It's pretty cool stuff.
Oh, thank you. I don't have to do boss voice anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
Doing that, yeah, okay.
All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about the value proposition of this whole thing from the developer's point of view. So if you decide to go down this path of integration, what is your cost to do it, and what type of return do you want to see from that?
Is this the money part?
This might be a little bit, product-y.
Okay, I'll translate for engineers.
Right,
Go ahead.
great. So first is, what are you investing to do the integration? So in our experience working with our partners, the feedback we have gotten, the API is simple, it's very easy to use, and we've had several reports of partners that were able to build their entire drive integration on an existing web app in less than 24 hours. A couple of them even talked about that directly in their press release.
So guys, your boss is going to be all like, how long is it going to take to do the Google Drive integration? And you'll be like, man, it's only going to take a week. And then you do it in a day, and then you go see Avengers again.
So your investment is relatively small. So what do you get in return? So you're going to get access to two things we think are very important. The first is the Drive user base, and you heard this morning that Clay announced we're already over 10 million users after a couple months, and pretty soon you'll get access not only to that user base, but anyone basically who has a Google account. You'll be able to interact with their Drive in some way. So that's a very large, very active user base. And then what we're going to talk about more in just a minute, and I think Clay kind of touched on this, and we're going to explore it in more depth here, is that the users you get as part of a Drive integration tend to be more engaged and more active users. So that's definitely something you're going to want in your user base.
Not just more users, they're better people.
And we also give you many opportunities to grow your install base. It's a great way to get exposure for your app. And as you saw in the demo, we promote apps all throughout the UI and virtually any place users can interact with files, like the chip you saw in the bottom left corner of our viewer that helps you go to the Chrome Web Store and find apps specifically for that type of file. We also, every time users share files created with apps, we give the receiving user an upsell to install your app if somebody shared a piece of content with them. And the CWS chip that we mentioned before. So all those things help you give you new channels to grow your install base, and is a very nice return on this relatively small investment. So we're going to walk through a couple case studies now and kind of show you what that looks like with actual numbers from our partners.
Yeah.
All right. So first is SlideRocket. So SlideRocket has a web-based presentation editor that allows you to create presentations, and they store the data in their own system. They've been around for a while and already have a relatively stable and large user base, and they did their drive integration and launched with us back in late April. So since that time, 8 out of their top 10 days for registrations have come after the Drive launch. So they've seen incredibly accelerated growth in installs because of their Drive integration. And then this really speaks, this next point, to this viral growth channel that happens when people start sharing content they create with Drive apps. Over a quarter of all their new users since Drive launch have originated from one user sharing a SlideRocket presentation with another user. So it's a very powerful channel for growth. And when they compare Drive users to their original baseline non-Drive users, they found some pretty surprising things. Drive users were 3 times more active. They logged into the product 3 times as often. And they also created over 3.5 times more presentations than non-Drive users did.
See, better people.
So the next case study is Lucidchart, which is a flowchart and diagramming tool. They gave us 2 interesting numbers that came out of their analysis comparing their original baseline users with the new users that came as part of the Drive integration. So for them, they had a very interesting result. One of them was that the users they were getting via the Drive channel tended to be more large team-based enterprise accounts, which for a piece of software like this is a very, very important metric for them because that means it's going to be higher retention rates, better monetization, better conversion. So they're getting exactly the users they want in larger numbers because of the Drive integration, and in large part because the Drive integration makes it so much easier for their users to work in teams. And then they saw something very similar in terms of engagement and document creation, that Drive users were creating 3 times as many documents through Lucidchart as their non-Drive users were. The last case study is HelloFax. And HelloFax measures user engagement with 2 metrics. One of them is how many faxes are sent, and the other one is how many documents are sent for signature. And they are seeing significantly higher engagement along both metrics for the same comparison of Drive users versus non-Drive users. 26% more faxes and twice as many documents sent for signature. So I think the data we're getting back from the developers and the people in the ecosystem are pretty significant. And that's that when you do the Drive integration, it creates a much richer environment for users both to collaborate and to create more content. It's much more interactive, and there's a lot more opportunities for you to grow your install base.
So here is what we're launching at Google I/O. So first, the Drive API version 2, and it adds all of the Drive operations that the Drive UI can do or that the old docklist API can do to the existing V1 API. So it's the new RESTful API with all of those different languages we talked about before, and OAuth 2 and all of that stuff, but it can do anything that you can do in Google Drive. And there are 2 levels of access in the Drive API now. So there's the level of access I talked about before, where your app can just get it files that it created or were granted access to the app. And that works fine with all operations. So if you list files, you'll just see the files that your app has access to. So it sort of filters the view of Google Drive based on what your app has access to. But if you've written the kind of app that really needs complete access to the user's drive, you can write that too. So if you want to write an alternate client for Google Drive, you have all the tools you need to do it. You will get a scarier message at authentication time, of course, but you know that's the price of functionality. And now there's no Drive app required for API access. That was true in the original version of the API. Not true anymore. You don't have to have an app at all. And there are 2 new client libraries available. So if you want to write apps in JavaScript or Objective-C, because say you want to write, well, you know what Objective-C is for, then you know those libraries are available to you too. And we're improving the mobile experience, to my previous point. So now you can launch Drive apps right from the Android Drive application. So if there's a web app, you can launch it right from there. We talked about that before. As you heard earlier, we've got an iOS app for Drive nowadays. And although this functionality isn't available in that app, it's coming soon. And you can open and save to Drive from within mobile apps. So if you want to write an app that's not at all integrated with the Drive client, that's fine. You can do that on iOS or on Android mobile devices right now. And then finally, the mobile libraries are just a lot easier to use. With the new rebuilt APIs, you'll find the whole experience of developing for mobile clients a lot smoother.
So if you're interested in writing any sort of Drive integration on mobile, we're going to have a session later today at 4 o'clock in room 6 where we're going to walk you through that process in a whole lot more detail. So how you would do Drive integration on a mobile device.
Yeah,
so
if it turns out that I'm wrong about it being easier, feel free to punch me in the face.
Deal. All right. So the next thing that we're launching as part of this new version of the SDK is the Embeddable sharing widget. So we talked about how important sharing is to third-party developers as a growth channel. So what we want to do is make that even easier for your users to access. Because right now, when you create third-party content in Drive, you have to go back to the Drive UI in order to share it with other people. We want to take that functionality of sharing and be able to bring it directly into the third-party app. So we've made sharing now embeddable. All you have to do is drop in some JS libraries and do some client code, and users will be able to access this very dialogue directly from any third-party experience. So you're probably thinking that sounds extremely complicated and it's going to make my auth story and my security story way more complicated. The good news is we've taken care of that for you, and it's really easy to integrate this directly into your app. The next thing we're launching as part of this new SDK is the ability for third-party apps to open native Google documents directly from the Drive UI. So for instance, say you're HelloFax and you would like to be able to have users fax Google documents using your app. Well, the way it works is Google Documents are able to export to a number of different formats, and if you're HelloFax, all you have to do is declare your ability to handle those export formats, and we will do the magic behind the scenes where we'll export it to, say, PDF. HelloFax takes the converted PDF and then can fax it. So that'll be available for all the native Google document editors, Google Documents, spreadsheets, presentations, and so all the conversion formats that they support, you'll be able to open as part of your app. So all that content that exists from all of these Google Documents, Google Docs users for years will be available to you to manipulate with your apps.
Aw, thank you. We like it too.
So now we're going to show you a little bit about what's going to be coming down the pipe here over the next few months. And
Get out of the way, son, I'm driving. Okay, so here's what's coming soon to the Google Drive SDK. I'm very excited about all of this stuff. Well, both of this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff coming soon. We're just talking about two things. So the first is push notifications. If you're using the Google Drive APIs right now and you need to show a kind of updated view of what's going on in a user's drive, then you are polling. And that is inefficient for you, and it's not great for our system either. So we are adding real-time notifications. So, oh, there it is. Yeah, so you will just set up a kind of listener, and you will get invalidation notices when the drive changes, and then you can go in and ask what's different, and you'll get it. And we're going to support a variety of mechanisms that will be appropriate for whatever device you're on. So if you're trying to do this from JavaScript, it'll use one mechanism. If you're trying to do it from, from Android, it'll use a different one. But your code will be almost the same in all of those environments. So it's going to be fairly consistent and easy to write. So here's the other thing, which I'm very excited about. If you've ever used Google Docs, there's real-time collaboration where two people can work on a document at the same time. And they can just see their changes interposed together, and it's really cool. We saw a demo of it earlier. We put together our own demo that we'd like to share right now. Based on a true story, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you. So what if, let's go back to the presentation. What if you could add those features to your app? And what if it was easy? Well, it turns out that there are a number of engineers that worked on Google Docs that are on the Google Drive SDK team. And it turns out that if you're clever, you can generalize the technology used in Google Docs to work for any data model. And so maybe we went ahead and did that. So let's go to the demo. You'll notice this little paint program, and isn't it adorable? I'm going to reload because the network went down. Okay, so I've got a little thing, and when you've got a paint program, you draw a little man, and he's happy. And then, a ghost is drawing in my same document. But it's not. It's Josh, because this is collaborative. Now, here's the thing. The code behind this was incredibly simple to... What are you drawing? There's a paramecium is firing a bow and arrow. Oh, and then you've defaced my guy. Yep. Okay, well, your paramecium gets a beard. How do you like that, punk?
I like it.
Oh, and also, let's say that we both decide to change the title of this document at the same time. You want to get in there?
Yeah, let's do that.
Right on top of my cursor, huh? Nice. Jeez. Thank you for having some constructive input. Okay, good. So we're simultaneously editing on that. The code to wire up that text box to be collaborative was 2 lines. And if you add another text box, it's 3 lines. The code to get this paint thing working, we'll show it to you in a second actually, but it turns out it's very, very simple to set up. And when you write these apps, you don't have to know anything about the operational transform theory that goes behind resolving changes or any of that stuff. You write your code like it's a local JavaScript data model. You just call like setters and getter methods, or add and remove methods if you're dealing with an array, and it all just works. And the only difference between writing one of these apps and writing a completely in-memory JavaScript app is that you need to add listeners to your data models, because unlike a traditional data model, these things might change because somebody else did something in the program. So if you wire up your listeners, and you might be writing your code this way anyway, then that's it. You've built a collaborative app. Now, this paint program, although Google doesn't provide anything like this, it is the kind of thing Google might provide. So we wanted to show you that this really works with any data model, so I decided to do the geekiest thing possible. So here is a text adventure that we wrote using this tool, but it's a text adventure where you can modify the world as you play. So right now we're in the Drive SDK session. We appear to be in some sort of conference venue. 2 geeks drone endlessly on a stage at one end of the room, and there is an exit north. Let's go north. We're in the hallway because there are sessions going on. The hallway is a deserted wasteland. Tumbleweeds roll past piles of abandoned business cards and swag, and there's an exit south. There's not a lot going on in this game, but now let's have a collaborator add an item to the game. So I've already set this up, so it's easy for me to... Something is different. Let's look. The hallway now contains a disco wand. Let's take disco wand, and let's try to use it. It only works in conference rooms. Well, let's go back south. And so the 1970s reign supreme in this discophonic funkosphere. We feel free and alive for the first times in our life. We win the game. Now, the cool thing here is that the world was persistently changing the whole time. So when I reload this, it's using that collaborative data model, and again, not doing anything special, just setting properties on it. But when I reloaded, I was back in the disco because that state was just automatically persisted as we changed the data models. So these things are really, really easy and, I dare say, fun to write. And if you notice those URLs, don't bother going to them. Like I said, they're only whitelisted for Googlers, and they will be busted. So real quick, this is half of the JavaScript code for that paint application, which was not written by me, by the way. It was written by Eric Scheffler on my team, who was awesome. I just adapted it to use the collaboration API. So this is half of the code. You're not expected to read it. The green stuff is all of the code that has to do with collaboration. And I'm being liberal in determining what has to do with collaboration because I included stuff like setting up listeners and things like that, which you might be doing in your code anyway. So did you have a question?
Well, it looks like you don't have to add a lot of client-side code, but you probably had to write a ton of server-side code to make
Oh yeah,
that
that's
work.
right. Let me show you the server-side code. Oh wait, there isn't any. Boom! Yeah. Damn. Thank you. You can, of course, write server-side code if you want. You can write your own, JSON calls and build your own servlets and call out to other Google APIs and do whatever you want. We don't care. The code that actually does this is all in clients. And so with that, I believe we're wrapped up. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is Josh, and I'm John. Now, I believe most of you are here for free t-shirts, so let's start earning those. Hello.
Hello. You mentioned the addition of the JavaScript client-side library in version 2.
Yep.
Is that specifically for UI and front end, or do you think we could maybe use that in Node.js?
Yes, my DevRel guy is telling me that that'll work just fine. And everybody loves it, so thank you.
Thank you.
So is there an effort to provide some kind of application framework to help us build these great client apps that have integration with Drive and collaboration? There seems to be efforts with things like Dart and Go and different languages and GWT. There's rumors of it going away. What's the sustainable path I should be going down?
The APIs that we are providing right now, we're very committed to continuing to support. So, if we've published an API in your language, you'll have to check in with our developer relations people to be sure what the exact time horizon we promise to keep them around in. But, we're following this path. You have nothing to fear, sir.
No, I don't mean the APIs itself, but as far as providing like an app framework that maybe gives me things like menus and dialogues and all the building pieces, so that I can just start with a hello world app and build my specific functionality.
Well, so I don't think that we have any specific plans to provide a larger kind of application development framework, but the developer sites have a ton of extremely useful examples that you can get into. I think that part of our philosophy has been, let's keep our APIs compact so that it's at your discretion how to integrate them with the rest of the tools you like to use.
We want to make sure it's really easy for existing web apps to add small footprint amounts of code and integrate existing investments with Drive.
That's something we really care about, is if you've already invested in building an app, we want to make it as easy as possible for you to add this functionality in and not have to re-engineer your whole thing.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned as far as being able to get data through Google Docs, like export to a PDF and then pull it in like that fax program, which they mentioned in the talk yesterday as well. Say there's like a third-party app that stores in some proprietary format, but can also export to PDF or some intermediate format. Is there some way you can say like, well, my app can accept things that can be exported to PDF, and this app can export to PDF, so allow me to see any apps, any documents that can possibly be imported in my app through that.
That's a great idea.
We've thought a lot about that.
We have thought a lot about that. So although, again, we're not announcing any specific plan to do that, consider your suggestion duly noted.
Thanks.
Oh, sure.
Let's go on the
Crossorigin requests. We've noticed that several APIs don't return the Crossorigin header for star. Is that intentional, or?
I don't. You mean APIs as called from JavaScript?
Yes, we have an application that has an embedded WebKit view that is trying to access some of the REST APIs in Google Drive.
If that's happening, there's some sort of buggy behavior, and you should talk to our developer relations team, because they're telling us that we absolutely do support that.
Okay, yeah, we have some issues. So.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the examples that I showed you for the collaboration API are making CORS requests, and they're working.
From your site?
Yeah.
Okay, sure, thanks.
So this is a little bit more about Drive itself, specifically, enterprises and teams, and, how are you dealing with, I want to share, or rather, if I'm, the CIO of an organization, I want to know all the files that are being stored in my user's, Google Apps account. Is that possible in Google Drive in general, and then also from the SDK and API?
It's possible with the API, and there are a lot of really good third-party products that do exactly that kind of thing, that help you manage your enterprise-wide corpora. And they'll give you all kinds of nice data and reports on what your user base is doing and the traffic and the types of documents and that sort of thing. Our general philosophy around that is we want to give third parties the ability to build those exact kind of tools with our API. And that's what a lot of this new launch is about, because you have these much more powerful file system type operations that will enable exactly those types of integrations.
And sorry, just as a follow-up,
Sure.
For the permissions of that, does each individual user have to then enable the app to have full access permission, or is it done, similar to like the apps marketplace, where it can just be applied to all of the users at once?
Yeah, there are like admin users that API calls can run as and that sort of thing. That can,
Yeah.
It doesn't require like a lot of specific user actions in order to enable that type of monitoring.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure.
I was wondering, is there any way to have sort of data locality, like to sort of do some processing in the drive? Like I like being able to share everything, but if I want to have some structured files in the way that I'm used to, and I maybe need to run sed or grep or something like that, if I wanted to implement it, is there any way to do some processing next to those files, or would it just be that, you know, the user would say, oh, I want to run such and such a awk command, and I would download it from the web service, process it, and then write it back to the drive?
That is probably how you would want to do it, especially if you wanted to do sort of a massively parallel type thing. Although you might be interested in looking at AppScript, because you know, AppScript is capable of doing a lot of the same analyses that things like awk and grep can do, and that processing is done in the same data center as the data, so often you'll get good performance without having to download the whole file.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great.
Two separate questions. The first question is on the Chrome store. You were saying that anybody could download any of the apps. Is there any way to restrict the access to those applications to a specific corporation or a specific domain?
It is, the only granularity we have there now is an individual domain can either turn apps on or off. Being able to whitelist or blacklist specific apps is still something that's on our roadmap that we're moving towards. But as of right now, we can't give you that level of granularity in terms of configuration.
That's right. You can't restrict the ability to actually install them, but then you can make sure that they don't work on your domain. And also, if you're writing a third-party app that needs to be constricted to a certain group of users, there are Google APIs that will give you enough information about the user for you to do that on your own app. So it'll be a bit awkward if a user does something that they shouldn't do, but you have the ability to shut out users that shouldn't be there.
Okay. And the second question is kind of a follow-up to one of the previous people. In one of the previous sessions, someone had mentioned that you were coming out with service account capability for administrative access. Is there any time frame on the roadmap for that?
It is coming out officially soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems that you have some overlap with some of the features of cloud storage. Although it seems almost more robust than cloud storage. As a developer, should I look towards using cloud storage for higher performance or for a task? I mean, have you benchmarked it and checked out how it compares to performance-wise against cloud storage?
Well, there's not as many overlapping use cases, I think, as you would think. What we're trying to position Drive to developers as a place you want to store user data. If the data is user intermediated in any way, it makes more sense to put it there than in cloud storage. If you want to store assets that aren't necessarily related to individual users, and cloud storage is the product you would want to use. They have a lot of similar features, but the use cases, I think, are fairly different.
We have an application that serves user data, and we use cloud storage for that. If I migrate to Drive, would I get a performance hit on the serving of the data?
They use very similar backend systems.
Yeah, I mean, the use, but they do serve different purposes in that, like, Drive is really is best for file-centric data that you want users to be able to see and access anywhere. So if you care about having sync clients that, you know, automatically can sync data to a user's machine or devices, like those kinds of features and the built-in search probably make Google Drive a good choice. But if you're looking for something that is more a pure storage backend, then cloud storage is a great choice.
And the economics of the two systems are drastically different, because in Drive, all of the storage is accounted directly to users. But if you use Google Cloud Storage, developers have to pay for the storage directly. And if you're doing that on behalf of users, then you have to figure out some way to pass the cost of your storage on to individual users. So if it is user intermediated in any way, it probably makes more sense to have it in Drive.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
With the new collaboration APIs, will that support the offline type capabilities?
Yes, there will be offline. We are still trying to figure out whether or not we're going to handle offline automatically, or if we'll give you the ability to get a version of the data model that you can flush offline instead. So if anyone wants to tell me suggestions about why you prefer one mode or the other, I'd love to hear them, because that's still up in the air.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So along that lines, in the segue of version control, do you have any roadmap plans for how you plan on integrating previous versions of documents being released into a change management system.
Are you talking about for collaboration API or for Drive in general?
Drive in general, I guess, but also in terms of how it might affect a API.
Well, let's see. For Drive, when you upload a file, you can choose to. You're always uploading a new revision of the file, and then you have the ability to say that this is a pinned revision, and so that revision is guaranteed not to get cleaned up. If you upload a revision that you choose not to pin, it means that later revisions might cause earlier revisions to get deleted if they're ones that you didn't care about. But history is kind of built right in when blobs are uploaded.
So on the question where they had the offline and they demoed in the keynote, the changes made automatically applied. How does it affect? Is it timestamped for clobbering other users' offline versions?
In his particular demo, he used Google Docs, and Google Docs uses something like the collaboration API. So that stored the data in a temporary browser cache, and then it used the same protocol that it uses to sync in real time to get all those things back into sync. So Google Docs and the collaboration API are very tightly revisioned. So almost everything you do gets a revision in a history log.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I really liked the demo early in the keynote on searching inside your image files. Do you guys have any plans of indexing and searching in custom formats delivered by the apps?
So what we do right now is we expose to the API the ability for you to set the indexable text yourself.
Okay.
So whatever you feel like is important to allow users to search for within your data, you can pass that directly to Drive via the API, and then when users search for things in that body of text, they'll show up directly in the UI under search.
Does this include also searching from the API?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
So say I'm building a voting application and I want people to vote between carrot sticks and cookies. And I share my ballot with Cookie Monster. And Cookie Monster is a pretty savvy programmer. What's to prevent Cookie Monster from using the RESTful APIs to vote for cookies 2,000 times?
Well, nothing, because Cookie Monster was given a very high level of access to that document. So I suggest that in a situation where you need to really have more granular control of how data is written, that you don't want to use the Google Docs sharing model, because there's no write-only access to a doc really. I guess you could use forms for something like that. But yeah. The point is, if you want to expose things to Sesame Street characters and it's very volatile political context, I suggest that you build a strongly authenticated front end and write to a back end where there's no direct user access at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, there's a natural, mesh between Docs and Drive, and I think your Docs files automatically show up in Drive.
Right.
What about contacts and calendar? Is that, I don't know, I don't know if they show up automatically. I don't think they do.
No.
And what is the plan for that? Because, I don't want to write some sync client that maybe shows these things up into thing when Google is going to be releasing that,
right.
Relatively soon.
Contacts and calendar events will stay in their own sort of product data silos. We're not going to attempt to surface those in Drive. We do have some plans around other types of internal product integrations, but those are still pretty far down the roadmap list.
But if you want to write that app, you have all the tools you need to do it. It's possible to just write shortcuts into Google Drive that when clicked go out to your site, where then you can fetch whatever other Google entity you want and show it using their APIs. So go start yourself $1 million business, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I already have, but.
Oh. Can I have some? Yes, sir.
Just thinking about the sharing and also notifications, is there any plans to kind of enhance sharing that could do like a workflow, so kind of route a document to person A, if they approve it, it's going to route to person B and they'll get some kind of notification of the sharing?
Well, we don't have anything like that right now.
So you have a couple different options. We are linking more and more actions that occur in Drive wiring them into our scripting language, AppScript, so you could build a custom workflow solution that way. And then we're giving you a whole lot of tools via the same events and with the API, so you can like via the notifications that we were talking about. You can monitor for certain events. You'll get push notifications. It can perform actions using the API. So a lot of ways to build a custom workflow solution, but we're not going to overlay that type of functionality directly in the product itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we are over time, so thank you so much for coming. And T-shirts are in the back.